the bodies hit the floor. It's Season X of You're All Doomed, the podcast that dissects the Friday the 13th movies into 13-minute chunks. I am douchey business suit-wearing bureaucrat Greg.
And I'm Brian.
This segment starts with a black screen that becomes the New Line Cinema logo and ends with a frozen body under some tubes. Let's set the stage a little bit, though. This is the first Jason movie to be made after Scream came out in 1996. There was a little bit of a gap between Jason Goes to Hell and this movie, during which the slasher subgenre basically died. Jason Goes to Hell was even kind of on the tail end of it, and all of the major franchises had lain dormant, and straightforward slasher movies were no longer really financially viable. But then Scream came out, which kind of reinvigorated the genre, but in a very metatextual level where it was very self-referential and jokey. And so this movie kind of has that additional challenge ahead of it. It has to adapt a little bit for the new audience that is coming in.
It's also worth pointing out that 9 years passed between Jason Goes to Hell and Jason X, which is an eternity in terms of a sequel to a franchise. So I do remember this one kind of coming out of left field, just assuming that the franchise had died for a number of reasons with Jason Goes to Hell. And so when this one came back 9 years later, it was a bit of a surprise.
Yeah, and it was definitely the longest gap between movies at that point. We've now blown that record out of the water, but yeah, definitely had lain fallow. I do kind of like that once this movie gets started, it does reference Jason Goes to Hell visually. We start off in this fiery hellscape that reminded me a lot of the end of The Black Hole. A lot of towers and bridges of brimstone and flames, and it was visually kind of a nice reference. I liked that.
Yeah, and there was even some like demonic voices, kind of some like indistinct, yelling going on in the background, but it was very kind of spooky, and it was hard to get your bearings. Like you weren't exactly sure where you were, but you certainly picked up pretty quickly that it was probably hell just because of what we were looking at. So yeah, I did agree that it's a nice kind of like segue from the last Jason movie we saw into what we're about to see.
Yeah, as the title card and opening credits roll, which we discussed last season, generally annoys me when they interrupt things, but in this case it didn't bother me so much because it wasn't really telling vital story. It was more of an opening title sequence, almost like a James Bond kind of thing, where it's very abstract and not providing you with concrete information that you have to be absorbing and then cutting away to names that you don't give a shit about. So that was okay. And it slowly morphs into what is obviously meant to be cellular structure or blood vessels.
Which I thought was very cool.
Yeah, I really liked that.
Because it's the same idea. It's like, hey, we're in hell, we're in this like horrible place, and then it does kind of morph into this like bloodstream, internal view of someone, and you can make the connection like, oh, like the insides of this person are pure hell.
Yeah, I really liked that a lot. It pulls out periodically and reveals a close-up of an eye, and reflected in that eye, a masked medical person administers an injection or takes a blood sample. I'm not sure exactly what's happening, but then we swoop back into the blood vessels for more credits, and we see that Harry Manfredini is back on the music, which is always great. I'm thrilled that he's here for this. The writer, Todd Farmer, we'll discuss a little bit later because he actually has a role as a character. And then finally, the credit sequence ends with director Jim Isaac, who also has a small cameo as the doctor reflected in this close-up of an eyeball. Jim Isaac, who sadly died in 2012 of multiple myeloma at the age of 51, kind of came up as a special effects guy. He worked on Return of the Jedi and Gremlins and Enemy Mine, and was apparently a bit of a protege of David Cronenberg, which will become relevant in a few minutes. He, in fact, wound up directing the Sean Cunningham-produced House 3, which turned into a movie called The Horror Show, starring Lance Henriksen. And Kane Hodder, who, as everyone knows by now, played Jason, was a stunt double for Brian James in that movie. So there's some nice cross-pollination going on here that's fun to see. And we'll discuss Jim Isaac as we go, but I farewell to him for sure.
So even though we see evidence of hell in the opening credits, and we later determine that it's Jason's insides, there is that connection to Jason Goes to Hell, but that's really where the connection to the movie stops. Because if you remember, in Jason Goes to Hell, Jason gets pulled down to hell by Freddy Krueger, and it just kind of ends. And there's nothing that tells us what happens in between. All we know is now that Jason has been captured and he's in this research facility, which is a cool setting. It's a cool way to kick off a movie. It's very similar to that FBI sting at the beginning of Jason Goes to Hell. I just would have liked a little bit of context to tell us how that happened. If you're going to ignore Jason Goes to Hell because it was probably impossible to figure out how do you get him out of hell and capture him, that's such a complicated story that I don't know anyone really needs to hear it. But if you are going to ignore that and you're going to say, hey, here's Jason, he's been captured and he's in this research facility, I would have liked to have seen something that told us how that happened. How did he get captured?
That's a completely valid point of view, and I'm not gonna say you're wrong and argue with you about it. If you prefer that, that's great.
It's exactly what I prefer. Stop arguing with me.
I kind of admire the fact that they even gave a little nod to hell, but completely ignored any logistics about matching up with the previous movie. I mean, from a real world level, this movie is just a placeholder because they still hadn't worked out how to do Freddy versus Jason. So they couldn't do anything to disrupt those plans. And so story-wise, they couldn't address the fact that the last time we saw Jason's hockey mask, it was being dragged down by Freddy's claw. So they were in kind of a bind. They had to do something in theory to bridge that gap. And I feel like this was it's there if you want it, and you can pretend that Jason Goes to Hell never happened if you prefer. So I kind of like the ambiguity of this approach. If they tied it too directly to then they dug Jason up and, from that dirt and, polished his mask off and put it back on him and then dragged him to the Crystal Lake Research Facility. I kind of like that they leave it very open-ended. But, again, it's personal choice.
Yeah, and it can go both ways. I see what you're saying. It's just that, you can also say that this movie is making no attempt to establish any kind of continuity in the storyline. So it's not necessarily that important to tell us how he got captured, but we know him, as fans of the franchise, we know him as this unstoppable killing machine. And now he's laying on this examination table. It would have been nice, even if it was just like the doctor with just like this passing statement being like, I can't believe we just found him on the side of the road, or, just something that would tell us, how they were able to gain possession of Jason. And you're right. It's one of those things where it's like, we've probably made this example before, but everyone was like, oh, Darth Vader is cool. Wouldn't it be cool if we had 3 movies that told you what Darth Vader was like growing up as a kid? and it seems cool on the surface to some people, and then when it's executed, you're like, I was better off not knowing anything about Darth Vader. And that could be the case here, but I feel like it was a slightly missed opportunity where they could have just, whether it was Creighton Duke that captured him or like, I don't care. It's just like, yeah, okay, maybe not that.
Yeah, I mean that's totally fair. I guess my crystallized viewpoint on it is Jason Goes to Hell made absolutely no attempt to bridge the gap between Jason Takes Manhattan and Jason Goes to Hell. And at least this one gave a little clever nod to continuity. So I give it a lot of leeway.
Regardless, Jason has been captured, and we discover that he is awaiting cryogenic suspension. So in the real world, I did discover a place called Cryonics Institute in Clinton Township, Michigan, and I thought their mission statement was quite interesting. Cryonics involves cooling a recently deceased person to liquid nitrogen temperatures in order to keep the body preserved indefinitely. Our goal is to keep the patient preserved until future science is able to repair or replace vital tissues and ultimately revive the patient. It might seem like an impossible goal to revive a dead person. However, dying is a process rather than an event. A majority of the body's tissues remain intact at cellular level even after the heart stops beating. The goal of cryonics is to halt that process as quickly as possible after legal death, giving future physicians the best possible chance of reviving the patient. This may include repairing or replacing damaged tissues and even entire organs using advanced computer systems, nanotechnology, and medical equipment and procedures. So that whole process sounds rather horrifying. I checked in to see like how much something like this would cost. And long-term storage is a one-time fee of $28,000. It's due at the time of death.
That's actually not bad.
Right, but there's literally no guarantee that anything's going to happen. So you're just throwing $28,000 out the window. But also it's odd because so you have to keep this arrangement alive for generations, so you have to tell your children and they have to tell their and like they have to remind them that, hey, Grandpa Billy is, stored in a freezer locker in Clinton Township, Michigan. Let's not forget about him. So in the future they can revive him. Like that puts a lot of responsibility on future generations.
Yeah. Not to mention the fact you better fucking hope the company doesn't go out of business or that they have a generator, like.
Right, a bunch of defrosted bodies just melting on the floor.
And where are they storing all these people? Is it like they got one of those pods and they, have it in the driveway in the parking lot of the company? I mean,
So anyway, we see that Jason is secured by a comical amount of iron bindings and thick chains and numerous like massive padlocks, and he's standing upright. He's chained up like Hannibal Lecter, and there's a tube coming out of the back of his head, so they're probably feeding some sort of like IV drip into him. But he's standing there motionless, and he's just got one good eye open. But of course he's still wearing the hockey mask, which cracks me up. They've got this guy captured and it's like they're just still allowing him to wear his his famous outfit.
Yeah, I mean, I have some thoughts about his appearance here. They show him from behind at first, and it's basically a full head of hair. I mean, it looks very identifiably like Kane Hodder.
I agree.
So Jason looks a little bit too normal here. He looks like a dude wearing a hockey mask instead of this malformed woods haunting golem that has existed away from society for decades, and that was a weird design choice to me. But when the camera circles around and we see the hockey mask, I do think that the design of the mask itself is nifty. It's a little more angular than the ones we've seen in the past. It just looks kind of more customized, and I think it's neat looking. It only has the red crest between the eyes. There are no other markings on it. And I do like that Kane is, as Jason is just blankly staring at the floor. He's almost dormant.
Yeah, I like Jason's look here. I know what you mean by it being kind of like simple, but I also think that, especially with Jason Goes to Hell, the appearance was just, it was getting out of hand. Like they were just turning him into too much of a monster, and I didn't like it as much. So I saw this version of Jason as more of like a return to form. And it may have been the way the light was shining down on him, but it also looked like he had gray hair, which I thought was a really cool touch. That it's like he's been around for a while, he's worn and tired. And so, it's not my favorite Jason look, but I like that they were dialing it back a bit and trying to get back to more of a classic Jason.
That's a cool point, too, because I believe this scene is supposed to take place in 2008, by which point Jason would be well over 60 years old, because he drowned in 1957. And he was, like 9 or 10 or something like that at that point. So, I mean, he's an old man. And so, yeah, you're right. The fact that he would have kind of graying hair, that's cool. I like that touch. I don't know if it was intentional, but it's nifty. There's one little Ziggy Sabatka-looking guard who is watching over Jason from a nearby Death Star console. And I like that Jason's eye slowly flicks over for a baleful glare at this kid. It unnerves the young guy, and so he walks over and tosses a tarp over Jason, calling him an ugly bastard.
Can you think of a shittier job than being the one poor schmuck army recruit that has to guard Jason Voorhees?
Or a better job?
True.
I mean, if they let me sit down, I would be all for that. I mean, I would be talking to that guy nonstop. I mean, he wouldn't answer me, but I'd be like, dude, I know you're a terrible person and you've killed a lot of people, but you are the best. And can I give you a hug? I mean,
you'd go up to him and you'd be like, I'm going to take a mango-sized dump right on your hockey mask, you fucking fuck.
Yeah, right.
No, I just think it's funny that they have this, arguably the most dangerous person in the world, and he's in this warehouse with this one little, army recruit guarding him.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, what else does the Crystal Lake Research Facility research? Because it is enormous, and apparently they only have one research subject.
What was the name of that research facility near us that we grew up by where they did they tested deodorant and foot creams or something?
Yeah, Hilltop Research, where they would sniff armpits.
Yeah.
And you could actually, I heard a lot of radio ads to volunteer to be a medical subject for
an armpit sniffer.
Armpit sniffing. Yeah. I mean, I did it with for free with I would just go in and be like, do you want to sniff my pits?
We cut to a dark hallway where we see an important-looking dude flanked by 5 guards. This is Dr. Wimmer. He's approached by a woman asking him what he's doing here, and this woman's name is Rowan. Dr. Wimmer tells her that he's there to collect the specimen, which we know is Jason Voorhees. But Rowan says he can't take him yet because she hasn't prepared the cryo chamber. But Dr. Wimmer doesn't want Jason frozen. He wants him soft, which is gross. And he's going to be moved to the Scranton facility, presumably to be added to Michael Scott's personal collection.
I do like that Wimmer states outright that Jason has a Deadpool-style healing factor and is able to regenerate lost and damaged tissue, as well as hockey masks, apparently.
Rowan points out that they can't risk transporting Jason through open country. And as soon as she said this, I immediately wanted this to be like a heist movie where Dom Toretto and the rest of the Fast and the Furious crew are hijacking the convoy as Jason is being transported to Scranton.
Oh, and that's how they go to space. Dude, you just cracked it.
There's Fast and Furious 10 for you. You're welcome,
oh, you just
screenwriters.
Fucking amazing. The military unit that is escorting Dr. Wimmer is made up of a sergeant whose last name is Marcus, which made my eyes roll because I would assume that's a reference to the director of Jason Goes to Hell. And the 4 soldiers that are with him look like they're wearing skateboard helmets.
Yeah, they don't look like the most intimidating group of soldiers.
And it turns out that they live up to that reputation. They approach the tarped figure. But when they remove that tarp, they find out it's just Ziggy Sabatka, the guard. he's dead, but I can't tell exactly what happened to him. There's just kind of some blood. He was played by Jeff Geddes, and the most interesting credit I could find is that he played Mike Nesmith in a TV movie about the Monkees.
I did like the reveal of seeing the soldier under the tarp, though. It's a little bit like, again, kind of like Silence of the Lambs, where you're expecting it to be someone else, and it's not. But it was a little too ambiguous in terms of how he got up there and, how Jason broke free, because there was some substantial bindings holding Jason in. So, how did he get out of that?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I do like that it plays into Jason's theatricality, and I'm not sure exactly how this young soldier was meant to be standing upright, even though he was dead. But it was, it was cute. I liked it fine. Jason then appears behind the soldiers and unloads on everybody. He clocks one guy from behind, and there's a lot of, shackle chain pain and, smacking people around and stuff. But one thing that I found a little bit weird is that we see him deck 5 soldiers, and that's not even counting Sergeant Marcus. But there were only 4. So to me, that means that he had to hit one guy twice. And I don't like that. And I don't like that because nobody should ever survive being touched by Jason. It's one thing if you manage to evade him or dodge his swipe. But if he gets his hands on you, you should be dead.
I can't argue with that. I did notice that he got hit twice. He's just a nameless soldier, so I don't know who it is. But I like that. Yeah, you shouldn't be able to get away from him. That's fair. I did see something in my notes, though, that kind of answers a question that I just brought up, was the first person that he kills, he swings something at the guy's head and practically takes his head off. I paused it, and it kind of looked like a bolt cutter, which would explain how he got out of the chains, but where did the bolt cutter come from? And maybe the soldier had it in his back pocket for some reason, but
or Jason had it down his pants, kind of right. Like each arm of the bolt cutter in one leg,
yeah. Or up his ass.
Yeah, right. He also javelins Dr. Wimmer from behind, which I thought was kind of a cool kill. I liked that one. Dr. Wimmer was, of course, played by noteworthy director David Cronenberg, who was behind such classics as Rabid, Scanners, The Dead Zone, Videodrome, Dead Ringers, and in fact an episode of the Friday the 13th series on TV. Jim Isaac, the director of this movie, considered him to be something of a mentor and convinced him to appear in this role, provided he get killed on camera. But Cronenberg has been on camera before. He was actually the zipper-faced killer in Clive Barker's Nightbreed. Personally, I think my favorite Cronenberg movies are The Fly, which as a kid I could barely get through because that wrist snapping scene scared the fucking shit out of me. And then also more recently, A History of Violence, the Viggo Mortensen movie that I kind of watch a lot. It's a damn good movie. And it's kind of weird that a guy noted for body horror would then go on to make kind of a cool gangster saga.
He was also offered the opportunity to direct Return of the Jedi, RoboCop, and Top Gun, and turned them all down.
Top Gun?
Yeah. Can you imagine what Goose's death would have been like if Cronenberg had directed that movie?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Would have been like sucked into the jet engine and then like...
Oh my God, I would love to see Cronenberg Top Gun. Wow, Lucas was really casting a wide net with Jedi. I mean, he was talking to Lynch and Cronenberg. I mean, he really had no idea what he wanted for that movie, did he? And so he winds up with Richard Marquand. The final remaining soldier, Sergeant Marcus, is hurled through the door into the hallway. So he dies, I guess, from the blunt force. I don't know.
Sergeant Marcus's dying breath to Rowan is, "You're fucked. You should probably run," which I thought was pretty funny.
And I hope is the last words I ever say.
And shortly after, I will close just one of your eyelids.
Right, exactly. Sergeant Marcus was played by an actor named Marcus with a K, Perillo. He worked with David Cronenberg in 1996's Crash, the erotic car accident movie with James Spader, and was also the Undertaker in season 2 of Fargo, which is a show that I love. And he also appeared in The Boondock Saints.
I noticed that he's in a couple of episodes of the TV show The Expanse, which I've recently started watching. I think I just finished season 3, and he was already in episodes that I've watched, so I wasn't looking out for him. But I might go back at one point and just kind of see if I can spot him.
Nice. We then see Jason standing in the hall behind Rowan, which I don't know how he got there. I mean, again, it's Jason's teleportation abilities. But even more curiously, he's holding his machete. Why would they have kept that? Where would he have known to look for it? Was it laying on a table nearby?
Well, that's why, I mean, like, it would have been nice just to know how they captured him and how he got there.
True.
If this was like an immediate, like he was captured half an hour before we saw him on the examination table, then yeah, all that stuff's still going to be with him. But if they've been preserving him for a while, then it doesn't make sense that his machete would still be hanging around. But it's just very convenient that his machete just happens to be nearby.
Rowan grabs the shotgun that Sergeant Marcus has dropped, and we get some cat and mouse in this apparently empty and cavernous research center. No one else works there or whatever. She runs down into the boiler room or the basement. Apparently they keep their carbon freeze chamber down there. She manages to lure Jason inside to this cryogenic preservation tank. But I noticed one detail when she slams the door on him that enraged me. If you remember back to the last season of this podcast, in the Crystal Lake Diner, there was a menu board that talked about what desserts they served, and the last one on the list was Quadge Pie. And I was enraged because I couldn't figure out what that was, and I thought it was maybe like some sort of in-joke between the screenwriter and the director that they used to refer to whatever. But here it is again. It's stenciled on the front of this door, crafted into the metal.
Seriously?
Yeah. So,
like, how is it spelled?
KWAJ. And I immediately stopped the movie, and I then spent a good 45 minutes on the internet, bound and determined to figure out what the fuck this referred to. And apparently it's a reference to the Kwajalein Atoll, which is a small island smack dab in the center of the Pacific Ocean. It's part of the Republic of Marshall Islands. It's virtually equidistant between Hawaii and Papua New Guinea. It's the site of a U.S. naval base and has been since World War II. Apparently, Kane Hodder, who was born in California, moved to this atoll in middle school. He was 10 or something like that. Its nickname is Quadge, and that's where he kind of came into his own. He'd felt bullied, growing up, and this was where he went to high school and kind of found his footing in the world. Why that would be put into the movie, I don't know.
Two movies.
Maybe it's something that he just insists on. He wants a little nod to his formative years, which is fine, totally cool. I don't know if he invited, the director or whoever to come visit him there on a trip, and it's a gorgeous tropical place to hang out. I don't know what meaning it has, but that's the best I could find.
Well, it does make a lot of sense, and I'm actually a little ashamed for not picking up on it, because one, I did not notice it on the cryo chamber, but I just watched the Kane Hodder documentary, To Hell and Back, and there's an extensive part of the story talks about him growing up on this Pacific atoll. Didn't pick up on the name, so it's absolutely a relevant part of his life, and so now it makes sense. But you're right, why would it be so relevant to pull into two different movies? I mean, it was probably Kane Hodder's idea. That's not something that, the screenwriters would necessarily know about. So if it's just like a little homage that, Kane Hodder likes to put in movies, that's fine. Maybe it's in other movies that we haven't seen of his, but I'm fascinated that you actually got to the bottom of that, because I just, like you, assumed that it was just some stupid in-joke with the director and screenwriter.
Well, and it made me want to read his autobiography, but it's yeah, with you, I could totally see where he would say like, hey, can we put a little mention of this island where I grew up into these movies? But it's one thing to have it written on a whiteboard with a marker. It's another thing to have it, cast into the metal of the cryo chamber door.
So this was like a manufacturer's wording. This was not like someone stenciled it on there with their key.
This was
something?
Not paint. This was,
okay,
embossed metal letters on the door of the cryo tube. I was fucking furious. I'm like, why the fuck do they have Quadge in this movie?
I liked it a lot better when we just thought Quadge was like, some euphemism for pussy.
Yeah, I totally thought that's what it was. And so, I mean, in a way, I'm a little bit disappointed that it's, just something that meaningful to Kane Hodder. But I was so, like, it made me in a bad mood until I figured out what the answer was. Because I'm like, now I've really got to find out what the fuck is going on here.
So Jason is now in this cryo chamber, and Rowan locks the door and hits the power button, which pumps liquid nitrogen into the chamber. As Rowan looks through the small window to watch Jason freeze, Jason is able to get one last shot in as he somehow thrusts his machete, which again, where did that come from, through the steel door and into Rowan's stomach. This causes some of the liquid nitrogen to leak out of the main chamber, triggering an emergency lockdown. We see Jason slowly raise the machete above his head until he freezes in place, and the injured Rowan isn't far behind, also freezing thanks to the leak of liquid nitrogen.
We fade out and fade back in to find that the stairwell and this whole basement space is festooned in cobwebs. So obviously some significant amount of time has passed. The door upstairs opens, and 6 people come down wearing mediocre Star-Lord cosplay. I thought that Come and Get Your Love was going to kick up on the soundtrack. They begin to banter a little bit as they approach the cryo tank, but they speak similarly to how we do in this era, which doesn't make a lot of sense given what we learned, but is merciful that we don't have a lot of manufactured future jargon that we have to sit through.
One of the people in the group confirms that there are no toxins or bacteria in the air. This is KM14. This allows everyone in the group to take off their gas masks. They're not entirely sure what they've stumbled upon, but they figure it's probably a cryostasis unit. The room is in disarray. It's, like you said, it's covered in cobwebs and just overgrown, and so it's kind of hard to see what's going on. KM14, who appears to be some sort of cyborg, determines that the chamber is a Quadruport 11, which was manufactured in 2010. So we know that this opening attack scene took place in at least 2010, which was apparently a long time ago for the people in this group, because KM says that precise historic records of this time are inconsistent. Once they see that someone's inside the cryo chamber, they can't wait to open up, so they do just that. What could go wrong?
They find the Jason sickle with his arm raised and recognize that what he's wearing is a hockey mask. We learn that hockey was outlawed in 2024.
As it should, because the only hockey that's ever mattered is blades of steel.
But I do like the fact that we're, as of this recording, 3 short years away from hockey being banned. So anyone who is hoping for that reboot of the Mighty Ducks better get their crowdfunding underway. There's a little bit of amusing business here with the young teenager who's with them named Azrael, who picks up a frozen coffee mug and gets it stuck to his hand. I thought that was actually kind of funny.
So I have a question for you. We've at this point established that this group of people is from the future, the distant future. So why is this the first time that anyone has visited this facility since the lockdown?
Huh. That's a fair question. I mean, I wonder if environmental concerns prevented them from visiting terrestrial Earth sooner, and this would have been kind of low on the priority list of sites to investigate. I mean, if you've had to flee Earth and can go back after a period of however many years it's been, you're going to go to the U.S. Capitol or art museums or any number of places before you visit some obscure research facility in New Jersey that apparently only has one research subject within it.
But why wouldn't people from 2010 have gone in there to check it out? I mean, even after Chernobyl melted down, people went in to investigate.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, that's a fair point. Let's say that the opening sequence took place on Thursday. Why, as of Tuesday, did not, the EPA or whoever?
Did it just lock down and everyone's just like, well, sucks to be them?
Yeah, or we don't know when this, environmental catastrophe happened. Maybe it, just so happened that the day after Jason and Rowan got frozen, Earth went to shit, and so nobody gave a crap about Crystal Lake research because they were all busy trying to figure out how to flee the planet.
True, and we also discussed how we didn't see a lot of people in this research facility, and the people that we did see all died except for Rowan. So it's also possible that this was such a top secret, research facility that the secrets literally were, frozen in that room with the lockdown, and no one knew otherwise. Sure, there'd be Rowan's family members or something might be looking for her, but they may not know where she works or what she was doing.
Right. Well, I mean, you might think that the assistant to the regional manager in the Scranton facility might wonder why they haven't gotten the soft target shipment that they were expecting. But
exactly.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a little bit of a plot hole.
But one of the explorers named Sunaron is exploring the room, and he stumbles upon Rowan's frozen body under some crinkled cables, which is where this segment ends.
Yeah, the death count in this segment is 7. We have the guard, the 5 military people, and Dr. Wimmer.
To find out why I like Greg soft, not frozen, tune in next week for another episode of You're All Doomed.
You're all doomed.